Hello, everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to describe the image featured on the current slide. This slide features an image of an echinacea plant, which has appeared on all of our promotional material and will reappear throughout the event. We chose echinacea as an image because we felt that it reflected our focus on disability justice. Echinacea is a wildflower that grows in groups and is described as adaptive and resilient, with vibrant pink to purple petals, a spiky orange cone, with strong green stems and deep roots. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Good evening. My name is Alicia Howard, and I use she and her pronouns. I am the coordinator for the Sexual and Relationship Violence Response Program and a confidential advocate here at Portland State University. On behalf of the Women's Resource Center here at PSU, I welcome you to Take Back the Night 2020. We are so excited for our own PSU students, staff, and faculty to be joining us this evening. We're also excited for family, friends, students and colleagues from other local institutions, community members across the county, state, and nation to come together to raise awareness and take action against sexual violence in all its forms. Portland State is located in the heart of downtown Portland in Multnomah County. We pause to honor the indigenous people whose ancestral lands we occupy. The Multnomah, the Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of the Chinook, Tualatin, Oropato, Kalapuya, the Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We thank the descendants of these tribes for being the original stewards and protectors of these lands since time immemorial. We acknowledge that Portland, Oregon has the 9th largest urban Native American population in the U.S., with over 380 federally recognized tribes represented in the urban Portland metropolitan area. We also acknowledge the systemic practices and policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous and Native American families today. It is important that we always remember that colonialism is not only a historical artifact, it is a current ongoing process. We are honored by the collective work of many Native nations, leaders, and families who are and have always demonstrated resilience, resistance, revitalization, healing, and creativity. We are honored to be guests upon these lands. We also shoulder a responsibility to make sure our university meaningfully includes Indigenous students and supports making education relevant to their lives. We are grateful for them and continually commit ourselves to solidarity with them and other marginalized folks, especially survivors. Each year at PSU, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, SAAM, centers the voices of survivors across campus and in the larger Portland community. In 1973, Take Back the Night was birthed by folks in San Francisco, protesting the serial murders and violence against women of color in Los Angeles. This work has and continues to work toward eliminating sexual and domestic violence in all its forms through providing a space for awareness, community, and action. The Women's Resource Center at Portland State has hosted Take Back the Night since 1999. This year's theme is Disability Justice and Sexual Violence, Power, Healing, and Interdependence. As a center on campus who continues to address its own accessibility, especially in relationship to anti-violence work, we sought out to have a conversation about access and collective care and how these relate to ending sexual violence and building interdependence. Our goal tonight and throughout these events was to shed a light on the systems of oppression that connect ableism and sexual violence. And we're especially delighted to have with us again the dynamic Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha to speak with us about the necessary inner and social change work we must take up to address and end this oppression. Collectively, we welcome you to help center how our futures are all interconnected and that a truly violence-free culture must offer safety, dignity, and access for us all. We have immense gratitude to the many folks on campus who've helped make SAAM possible. Here to show our appreciation is Janet Seychow.
Hi everyone, my name is Janet Seychow. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm the administrative coordinator at the Women's Resource Center. I had the honor of serving on the Sexual Assault Awareness and Action Month Committee this year alongside a phenomenal team of fellow committee members and campus partners here at PSU. We couldn't have put these incredible events together without them. In acknowledging all the immense care and labor put into making this happen, we want to take a moment to recognize them for all the time and energy they've dedicated to organizing SAAM these past 5 months. Thanks to the Disability Resource Center, Queer Resource Center, Pan-African Commons, Illuminate, Mental Health Promotion and Counseling at the Center for Student Health and Counseling, Office of Equity and Compliance, Student Legal Services, Campus Rec, the Pacific Islander Asian American Center, Psi Chi Psychology Honor Society, WRC staff, student leaders and alumni, and student volunteers. Up next, Mona will give us some info about the great support services that are available and doing incredible work to support survivors of sexual violence and folks within the disabled community.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Mona Tugas, and my pronouns are they, them. I'm an access counselor and consultant at PSU's Disability Resource Center. I'll read through the next 9 slides to spotlight and share contact information for local support services on campus and in the community. This transition slide features the echinacea plant illustration. For the first campus organization, the PSU Disability Resource Center's mission is to make university life accessible to students with disabilities by identifying, evaluating, and reducing or eliminating barriers to student access and equity. The DRC fosters community and creates opportunities to promote disability culture, including virtual community space via Zoom twice a week, centering disabled students. The DRC's website is pdx.edu/DRC, and you can call us at 503-725-4150. The next slide features CCAA. Their logo is with blue letters in a gray heart outline. PSU's Chronic Conditions Awareness and Action is a student-led organization aiming to educate and raise awareness about chronic conditions and diseases. They work to create a welcoming environment that fosters discussions on living with chronic illness. They hold events at PSU that raise awareness. Find them on social media at Portland State CCAA or email them ccaa@pdx.edu. We're highlighting the CUTI Disability Affinity Group. The group's name appears here in white letters on a wavy background of royal blue, light pink, and white color blocks. The PSU Queer Resource Center's Queer and Trans Disability Affinity Group is a space where trans and queer students with disabilities share space, resources, and community. Find more on the PSU QRC homepage, Facebook, or by calling 503-725-9742. Project DART is a community resource located in the Gateway Center. They're a group of advocates and volunteers who provide direct, peer-based services to people with disabilities in the Portland Tri-County area. Services include advocacy within the justice system, advocates with knowledge about managing care provider relationships and preventing or dealing with abuse from caregivers, and knowledge about abuse, safety, and crime awareness for people with disabilities. Their website is projectdartpdx.org. Their number is 503-988-3200. 6481, and they're located at 10305 East Burnside. DRO, Disability Rights Oregon, provides tools and advocacy strategies to Oregonians with disabilities for upholding their civil rights. They prioritize issues that will have the greatest impact on the lives of the greatest number of Oregonians based on input they receive from the community. Their website is droregon.org, and their phone number is 503-243-2081. DRO is located at 511 Southwest 10th Avenue, unit number 200. The next slide shows the Victim Rights the Victim Rights Law Center's logo. It's in white letters on a dark blue background with a sprouting plant that takes the place of the second I in the word victim. The WRC provides free comprehensive legal services for sexual assault victims with legal issues in Oregon and Massachusetts in areas of privacy, safety, housing, education, employment, immigration, LGBTQ specific issues, criminal justice advocacy, and financial stability. Their website is victimrights.org. Their number is 503-274-5477, and they're at 520 Southwest Yamhill Street. The fourth community organization, Call to Safety, provides a comprehensive crisis phone line available 24/7 in a range of languages. Chat, text, and email support services are also available during business hours. They provide follow-up advocacy for survivors, community outreach and education, and sexual assault medical advocacy. Advocates offer every caller a needs assessment, peer support or groups, safety planning, crisis intervention, and referrals to community resources. They can connect survivors to culturally relevant and specialized services for survivors with developmental and intellectual disabilities, survivors that experience mental illness, houselessness, and LGBTQ+ survivors. Their website is calltosafety.org. Their toll-free number is 888-235-5333, and their email is support@calltosafety.org. Proyecto Única provides Latinx individuals and families with support, advocacy, access to community resources, and opportunity for self-empowerment, assisting survivors to exercise free and informed life choices, free of violence and oppression. It is the domestic and sexual violence branch of El Programa Hispano Católico, EPHC, that works to increase access to autonomy and self-determination for the Latino community, to provide support to community members as they identify and define their own empowerment, and to promote understanding of the enormous diversity in the Oregon Latino community. Their website is projectunica.org, and their 24/7 support line is 503-232-4448. And the final community group we're spotlighting tonight is Glitter Squadron Disability Block PDX. Glitter Squadron's logo here is in bright purple text with a glitter background. They engage in community care and solidarity, challenging systems and group cultures that include challenging systems and group cultures to include disabled existence, direct action, training, and education. They hold events to encourage community engagement and action, and provide services and connections to services. Connect with them on Facebook or via message at m.me/1283-73577791-544. Up next, Corey Lira will introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Mona. Hello, everyone. My name is Corey Lita, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Women's Resource Center, and I use she and they pronouns. I am excited to welcome and introduce our amazing keynote speaker, Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. When we decided to make disability justice the focus of this year's Sexual Assault Awareness and Action Month, asking Leah to join us was a natural choice given the work that they have done to bring disability justice to the forefront of our social justice movements, along with Leah's work on transformative justice and supporting survivors of harm. Let me share a little bit more about Leah and read her bio with you all so we can hear about all of Leah's experience and work that they have provided us. Leah is a queer disabled femme writer, cultural worker, and educator of Burger Tamil Sri Lankan and Irish Roma ascent. They are the author of Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice, Dirty River, a queer femme of color dreaming her way home, which was shortlisted for the Lambda and Publishing Triangle Awards and the ALA Above the Rainbow list. Body Map, shortlisted for Publishing Triangle Award, Love Cake, Lambda Literary Award winner, and Consensual Genocide, and the co-editor of The Revolution Starts at Home, Confronting Intimate Violence in Activist Communities. And they most recently published their books, Tonguebreaker and Beyond Survival, the latter co-edited with Egeris Dixon. Leah is a lead artist with Sins Invalid. Her writing has been widely published with recent work in PBS NewsHour, Poet.org's Poetry in the Body Folio, the Deaf Poet Society, Bitch, Self, Truth Out, and The Body is an Apology. She is a VONA Fellow and holds an MFA from Mills College. She is also a Rust Belt poet, a Sri Lankan with a white mom, a femme over 40, a grassroots intellectual, and a survivor who is hard to kill. With excitement and appreciation, I give it to you, Leah, to begin.
Thank you. I'm trying to turn my video on and it says you can't start your video because the host has stopped it. Oh, wow, this is very dramatic. Hello, hi, live and direct from my living room. That's facing onto my kitchen because I live in a Seattle house where, you know how it is, PNW. It's like they're trying to make all the windows because there's no light. So like the two little sunbeams get to come in there. Corey, thank you so much for that introduction. And Alicia, Corey, everybody, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for all the work that you've done to create this, incredible week plus of work for Take Back the Night. And I'm seeing that people can't see me. Oh, now they can, okay. I also just want to, I said this yesterday, I want to start out by really thanking and acknowledging the labor, the Black and brown feminist labor that is also disability justice labor that is happening in terms of, pivoting. I mean, y'all reached out to me in early March, I think, being like, we're going to have Take Back the Night. And that was right when some of us were just starting to be like, okay, there's this thing called COVID. Many of whom were disabled. And when it became really clear that events were going to be canceled and that we were going to be sheltering in place, you all without question pivoted to make all of your events accessible online and to caption them and to work them to make them accessible. And that's disability justice, Black and brown feminist labor right there. Like that's when people say, what is disability justice? That's one of the things. Because there's been so many folks I know, including many sick and disabled folks who lost, all of the work that they were going to do in March and April because everything just got canceled and there was no pivot to let's work to make this accessible. So I just wanted to say that the reason that we're able to be here is it's a product of disabled labor. It's a product of disability justice organizing, this moment that we're in. This is me going off script. So I've got 45 minutes to talk to you about, I was like writing this and I was like, okay, what did they ask me to talk about? And it was one of those things, I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna embarrass y'all. It was like, we really want you to come to campus to focus on disability justice, collective access, care/liberation, body autonomy, and how those relate to and intersect with interpersonal and sexual violence and survivorship, and how these also speak to the shared systems of oppressions that connect to ableism and sexual violence. And that's one of those things, I'm supposed to be smart, but I was like, how the fuck, I I don't know what to say to all of those things. That's like 40 talks. But I'm gonna try. This talk is called Tender Points because it's kind of me having a disabled sense of humor. For some folks will know that when you have certain kinds of autoimmune illnesses, tender points are what they call all of your pain points, all of your ouchy places, if you make it to the doctor, the rheumatologist. And so I'm playing on that. And I also, as I started to write this, I was like, wow, writing about the intersections of being a disabled survivor and the intersections of disability justice and survivorhood are really tender. They're really in the body. They're really, really all up in there. Before I start all the way, I just wanted to say that I wanted to dedicate this to all of the sick, disabled, neurodivergent, deaf, mad, living with mental illness, whatever word you use for it, survivors who are hopefully witnessing this talk. I really want to name us. I love us. I witness us. I know that we exist. I know that so often our experiences are written out of so many different communities, including mainstream anti-sexual violence work. And I just want to say, I really, really want to lift us up, and this talk is for us before it is for anybody else. I also want to shout out the many people who might be listening to this who are sick, disabled, neurodiverse, deaf, but maybe don't know that you are yet. Because there's so many really good reasons why, for so many of us, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color survivors who are disabled, or sorry, my chat is going up and it's a little distracting. Let me rephrase that. There's so many of us, including particularly Black and brown folks, for whom there have been really good reasons for us to not feel like we can claim disability as an identity, even though we're disabled. Because it's a lot safer to hide and to not, it's not been safe to claim it, it's not made sense to claim it. And that comes from the racialized roots of ableism that goes back to enslavement, that goes back to indentured servitude, that goes back to colonization, where colonial, anti-Black racist forces were very overt about the facts, about their belief and their actions that made it really dangerous to be a disabled Black and brown person. So I just want to say that even if you never use the word disabled, if you have a body or a mind that doesn't fit into society's idea of what is normal and rational, disability justice has a place for you, and it's made up of folks who are living those experiences. Last but not least, I want to say hi to everybody who straight up is not disabled, deaf, neurodiverse, mad, or sick. And I want to name you because I think one way that ableism shows up is that it's so often true that non-disabled people don't think they have anything to learn from us. Maybe there's kind of a movie of the week like, oh, the disabled, they're so heartwarming. But there's not really a sense still in a lot of social justice communities that able people have some really intense things that are really life-saving, that they can learn from sick and disabled and deaf and neurodiverse communities. And everybody does. Everyone has a lot to learn from us. And I think that survivors, who are able to have a lot to learn from disabled survivors. And that's going to be some of the stuff I talk about. Okay, that's a lot of blah, blah, blah already. Hopefully you're still there. So there's this guy, Douglas C. Boynton. He was this like white, deaf, and disability studies professor. And he has this quote that I like and then I want to push, where I know I'm starting this talk by talking about a white guy, but it will not stop there. There's this thing that he said famously where he said that disability is everywhere once you start to look, but it's often not been written into the histories that we know. And I would take that a little further and be like, yeah, no shit. And actually disability is everywhere. And it's often not written into histories because of the way specifically disabled Black and brown folks are written out of history, out of white history. But I'm gonna riff off of his phrase because I think that disability is everywhere within survivorhood, within sexual assault, within questions around intimate abuse, whether it's childhood sexual abuse or partner violence, or ritual abuse, or adult sexual assault, or other forms of abuse. And one of the real kind of cliffhangers of how ableism is really fucking up the survivor movement is that, with exceptions, and not when disabled folks are talking about it, but often it's true that disability is forgotten about, right? Or, I have a piece called Cripping Transformative Justice that's in this book that I co-edited. And that's Beyond Survival, Strategies and Stories from the Transformative Justice Movement, co-edited with Jairus Dixon, where, it's an essay that I wrote about, bringing disability into transformative justice work. And in the second section, I was talking about mapping disabled survivorhood stories. And I was like, when you Google disabled survivor stories, the number one thing that comes up that has the most hits are these incredibly dry violence against women with disabilities, because it's only women and they're thinking about cis women, page and studies that are from the US federal government's Office on Women's Health websites. And it's a bunch of really dry statistics that are like, research suggests that women with disabilities are more likely to experience abuse than women without disabilities. And I'm glad those studies are there. They're better than nothing. But, when I was a young disabled survivor, I would, do the late 90s version of Google and try and look for disabled survivor stuff. And that was what would come up then too. And it's better than nothing, but I didn't see myself in those statistics, and so don't most people. They flatten our stories. When you're looking at those stories, I'm just gonna read from the book, like when you look at them, we're not present as full complicated beings, as the diabetic trans Latina who depends on her sometimes emotionally abusive partner for access, or your disabled brown friend, or yourself, who's one of a million sick and disabled sex workers out there, because sex work is often a really accessible form of work, or the abusive dynamics within a local disability justice collective, or your family member who got tracked into special ed and was sexually assaulted there. Disabled survivors who are other than cis women are never in there, and neither is the sexual abuse that is ableism, right? From the abuse that happens in institutions to the abuse that happens when we're cared for by family members, right? To the ways we're hypersexualized, or to the ways that we're not seen as being desirable or being allowed to have a consensual sexuality at all. And what I want to do instead in this project of bringing disability justice into survivorhood is to start with stories. Because some people may have seen, and I'm grateful for it, it's Sins and Ballads, 10 Principles of Disability Justice document. I'm so grateful for the thinking in it. It basically is Patty Byrne and a bunch of other Black and brown disabled queer badasses being like, look, this is why disability justice is different than disability rights. It's not just like the flavor of the week. It's saying things like, we are explicitly anti-capitalist, we're about interdependence, we're all of these things. Whenever I read that, just go look it up if this is making sense, but whenever I show it on a slide in a training, or I read it out loud, I'm just like, I just see a lot of people nodding because they're like, interdependence, anti-capitalist, leadership of the most marginalized. But I can see them being like, what does this actually mean in real life? And similarly, when I bring out the big words of like disability justice and survivorhood, like those are these big words, and it's like, oh, what does it actually mean? And when I start breaking it down into the stories in my life, it's real specific stuff. It's thinking about, all of the things that I didn't know were intersections of ableism and survivorhood when they were happening until years later. It's me at 28 with a partner who in my head, I was like, oh, she's not abusive. Unlike a lot of my partners before that, like this is my good adult queer relationship. And how she was a super able-bodied, skinny, white, cis, butch, maybe non-binary. I don't know how they identify now. And I remember really tentatively being like, I think I need a shower chair because I slip in the shower, and her laughing at me, right? I think about dating a partner where so much of what was, this is another partner, by the way, another story. I think about years later, dating a partner in my late 30s where so much of what was beautiful about our relationship was our access intimacy in terms of being survivors of CSA who had complex PTSD and who identified as people who were seriously mentally interesting. And so much of what was great about what our relationship was, you know, we really had this solidarity where we were like, we're going to refuse, you know, we're always going to love each other and accept each other, including when we're struggling with emotional hard times, or we're quote unquote batshit crazy, or, you know, we're looking really neurodiverse. You know, it's always going to be okay. Nothing's going to be too much. And so much of that was beautiful. And then there was one time when we were camping, we were in a remote area, and they were having a hard time, and they were like, I just need to scream. And they started screaming. And I remember sitting there, and I couldn't put words to it till years later, but in my head, I was like, wow, this is where my disability justice politics, where I never want to shame somebody for their disability, because as a disabled person, I really believe in us loving each other and accepting each other as we are. This is a moment where that commitment is bumping up against my history as someone who's survived 2 violent relationships, where I'm kind of like, last time I was with somebody who was screaming like that, something really scary was about to happen. I don't know how to be radically disability justice loving, accepting, and bringing that part of me into the room at the same time. Years later, I figured out, oh, maybe if we'd been talking about all of this stuff at the same time, we would have been able to have a plan where they could have been like, hey, I need to scream. Is that okay with you? Or I can go someplace else. But that was one of those moments where we bumped into a place that we didn't know how to hold yet. I think about things like the medicalization of survivorhood, to bring it really macro, where as survivors, whether or not we're disabled, so often our trauma is seen as a problem. We use the language of broken, of unfixed, of something's wrong with us. And I think about what could dramatically change the ways we relate to our survivorhood and the futures we can imagine for ourselves if we had more of a disabled politic that says that, yeah, you know, we might be kind of different forever. We might not be fixed into some kind of person who was never abused. We might have like wisdom and strengths that we can get out of our trauma stewardship. More on that later. And I want to segue, and I want to talk a little bit more about the big fun place where ableism and survivorhood meet, which is around desirability. So a couple years ago, I wrote this piece for this. It's actually out now. It's a good anthology. It's called Not That Bad, I think, and it's an anthology about sexual assaults that Roxane Gay edited. And it was one of those, like, you get an email as a writer and they're like, oh, you got to write this. This is a 48-hour deadline, but if you get your piece into Roxane Gay's anthology, your career is going to be made as a writer. So I didn't have a lot of time to write it, but the piece was called Unfuckable But Rapeable. And it was about what it sounds like. It was me trying to write about being an autistic disabled survivor and about those places where ableism and abuse have come together in my life, and often they've met on the grounds of desirability. And it was about my experience growing up being viewed as ugly and really weird looking and not quite a girl. And how that segued into, you know, I was sexually assaulted in school from most of junior high going into high school. Junior high was the worst. And, you know, to put it bluntly, like it was an experience where, you know, I was really known as the ugly, weird looking kid in school. And nobody had the words disability or ableism or, you know, neurodiversity or anything, but they just knew I was ugly and weird. And it was just this idea of like, oh, no one in their right mind would want to, you know, go out with you, but, you know, we can do bad things to you. And not only will no one notice, there won't even be words for it. And we're going to kind of act like those boys are doing you a favor, right? Because who would want to be with you? And it's this moment, right, where, you know, like I said, if you'd asked any of those boys in 7th grade if I was disabled, they probably would have said no, you know, they probably would have laughed. Sometimes, you know, the word disability or the R word or other, you know, disabled slurs are really all up in our experiences of assault. And sometimes they're not. sometimes the words disability or autistic don't have to be used. They don't have to be there, you know, for abuse to be happening and to be directed at you and for you to be targeted in part, you know, because of ableism. You know, I didn't have, you know, I'm 45. I did not have an official autism diagnosis when I was a kid. It was the 80s, you know, I was this light brown skin, mixed race girl, you know, and it was before the ADA. There were different people who were being targeted for diagnosis. I had a really interesting experience where my mom, you know, this is one of those things where it's right on the border of, did it save me or did it harm me? Probably both. She was really adamant about, we don't talk to social workers. We always lie to doctors if they ask if something's wrong. And some of that translated into neglect, but there were also ways that I think that she was trying to protect me from the medical industrial complex, right? It gets to be complicated. In any case, I was so clearly looking back an autistic, neurodivergent, weird, not quite girl, non-binary femme who was frizzy-haired and had the big plastic glasses and 2 pairs of pants from TJ Maxx with burns on them from the woodworking shop, who was really waiting to go home so they could run away into the woods and have a body and be safe because nobody was around. And so that's an experience that I carried with me for years that I didn't know how to name in my survivor history, right? And something that happened a couple years ago was that someone who is in an autistic Black, Indigenous, and POC group that I'm in made this comment where they were like, you know, we were targeted for abuse as kids, not because we were disabled. This is an important distinction, not because we were disabled, because our disability has never been the problem, right? There's never been anything wrong with us, but because of ableism, because our abusers knew that we wouldn't be taken seriously if we disclosed, because ableism was already making it so that we were seen as this untrustworthy narrator of our own experiences, that we were, you know, we were these weirdos, we were these pains in the ass, we were these people who people really wanted to go away. It wasn't our disabilities, you know, that made us vulnerable in themselves. It was the oppression. It was our abusers really looking around, even in junior high, and being like, I can go after that kid because they're not valued because of the oppression that their body and their mind is facing. So that's my origin story, one of them. And, you know, the question I'm sitting with is what happens to those of us who grow up in that kind of matrix or another kind of matrix? There's so many, you know, as disabled survivors, from, you know, disabled kids who are abused by our caregivers or in care homes or by medical workers or teachers or you know, siblings, a million other people. You know, what happens to us when we grow up in that matrix of surviving abuse, not really being believed when we talk about our bodies a lot of the time. And then maybe we make it out, and then what happens when we try and date, be sexual or sensual or be asexual? What happens when we try to have relationships, whether they're friendships or love or sexual relationships? What happens when we're trying to heal, right? And where we really need our disability to be seen and witnessed and understood by the people that we're going to healing for. And I'm gonna read a little bit from my book again, Leah Lakshmi's book, where it's on page 243, where I wrote, I want to talk about how ableism pushes us into isolation, strips us of social capital, and because of that, so many of us stay in abusive relationships of all kinds, or sometimes also act in ways that cause harm, because finding love, sex, and companionship as disabled people is so goddamn hard. And we feel like we have to take what we can get. Or because we haven't had many or any role models of other disabled people loving and dating and being in community well. I want to write about how surviving being, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. I want more disabled people to write our real stories of just how hard it is to find love, sex, healing, and friendships that are not violent, and where we're not closeting all of our weird body mind stuff or being ashamed or embarrassed about them or apologizing for them. I want us to write about the deep triumphs and complexities of crip love when we make it happen, whatever it looks like. I want us to talk about the ways we blow open and crip what sex and love can look like. Talk about the ways we negotiate consent and bodily autonomy non-verbally and through every cripped out means of communication. I feel like I spent a lot of my 30s talking about desirability politics with other femmes on a couch. I had a small group called Femme Heart Cheer Circle I was a part of in Toronto, and we would just hang out and talk. And we were all disabled. Some of us were more out about it than others. And a lot of what we talked about was how impossible it was to get anyone to swipe right. And that it didn't matter how cute and wonderful and amazing we were. You know, I was living in Oakland, California at the time in the 2010s, and I lived in 2 different big queer, mostly queer of color collective houses. And there was a lot that was great about it, but I spent so much of it in this rage because my housemates would all be like, oh my God, I went on Craigslist personals and oh, it's just overwhelming the number of people who want to hook up with me. And oh, I have this date and that date and I'm going to this sex party and oh, I'm seeing these people. And I just had a huge degree of bitterness and rage because that was not happening to me. I was getting maybe 1 hit a month. I was getting, oh, you know, I don't really have like a sexy vibe with you. I have a friend vibe. I was getting, you're really cute, but that's not, I'm not really feeling it, but could you help me facilitate this process? Could you do some emotional labor? This is on OkCupid. Pretty much putting disabled in your description meant that people might give you political head nods, but they couldn't consider being sexual or dating with you. And besides that couch, you know, I didn't see a lot of collective space for a long time for us to talk about that deep grief. But there were so many people I knew who I loved who were like, I am spending years of my life without sex with other people or romance or even friendship sometimes. And you know, in a lot of social justice, queer, woo-woo world, there's not really room to talk about it. I spent so much time longing. I spent so much time hating that I was stuck in longing. I had spent so much time hating how nothing seemed to work out. And I watched, in terms of survivorhood, I watched friends of mine at times who were other disabled, BIPOC, queers, act badly because of that. No one's gone out with me for 5 years, so maybe I'm going to be kind of pushy about consent, or because I feel so shitty that I'm not having sex. And I had a lot more friends who were like, on the other side of the coin of internalized ableism, where they were like, yeah, I think some not quite consenty stuff happened, or some really not consenty stuff happened because it's been a long time and I didn't know how to negotiate it. And they were also disabled, so wait, they're doing this bad thing. I don't know how to talk about this. All of the above and more. And then I also, you know, in terms of self-accountability, I had this huge secret compartment of what I didn't even have words for, but I would have, if pressed, called them. They were all my secret, weird body-mind things I did that I could not dream of telling anybody. I was an autistic person who did not know I was autistic yet. What I knew was that I had all this shit that I did that I was completely ashamed of and I could not imagine showing to any lover. And that also was true for a long time around a lot of sick and disabled stuff that had to do with chronic illness and disability. I don't want to try and do a screen share because it's going to go horribly wrong, but there's a slide you might have seen. It's going around, it was going around a couple months ago, where it's one of those memes where it's the Spice Girls and it says, if you want to be my lover, you got to get with my, and then it's like meds, couch, extensive collection of sweatpants, weird sense of humor about everything, symptom flare-ups. Yeah, I know a lot of people were like, you're so empowered. And I'm like, yeah, I still have a lot of stuff I'm working out. And that was not true for years and years and years. I mean, I was really living a chronic pain, sweatpants kind of lifestyle, for all of my 30s too. But I really couldn't imagine showing a partner my pain days, my sad days, I need to just like curl up in my bedroom and not talk to anyone for 2 days and watch TV days. I dated a lot of people when I look back who, well, there was the 2 years I dated only Aries, no disrespect to Aries, but they were usually Aries had 4 other lovers. So I was like, great, I'll just see them once a month and it'll really be on my most able-bodied behavior and they'll never see the other stuff. And And I'm sharing these stories not just to blow up my own spot or be cute, but to be like, this is some of the real deal around negotiating disability and survivorhood and trying to have lovers in adulthood. It's really, really hard to do when one of the biggest things that ableism gives us is shame. And it's so deep that it can take us years to unpeel those layers, right? You know, I was still apologizing for being triggered during sex. Like, oh God, sorry, I screwed up the whole encounter by needing to take a moment. And so what happened was, and this is one of those maybe answers to the $3 million question of how does DJ help? What started to change things was I was really lucky, and I happened to be in a time and place where there were people, like people involved in Sins Invalid, which is the Disability Justice Performance Collective and political collective that I'm a part of. Sins Invalid basically was one of the first disability justice collectives, and their whole mission was to advance disability justice and the end of racist capitalist ableism through doing performance art about disabled, kinky, queer sex by Black and brown disabled people. And so I got to see that. I got to sit in a room with disabled Black and brown queer folks who were a little bit, not even older than me, though some of them were, but further down the road of being in disability community. And I got to witness them ask for what they needed in terms of access needs without apology, you know, with completely unapologetic, this is just what I need. I need this kind of chair. I don't stand between me and my interpreter. I'm gonna go take a break when I need to. And it wasn't them, you know, I think being raised working class, I really had internalized this idea of like, oh, if you ask for that, you must be spoiled. You must be some kind of rich person. And then I was like, oh no, clearly these are not spoiled, entitled, rich white people. These are disabled folks who have a sense of self-worth and who are like, yeah, I'm gonna ask for this. And I have a right to it. I have a right to what I need to exist. One of the most impactful moments was I was at a workshop that Sins put on maybe around 2013 called Mixed Ability Fucking. That was a cross-disability sexuality workshop. And I just want you to picture this very Mission District brown social justice center, the Eric Quezada Center, and maybe like 30 to 50 people, all different kinds of disabilities, Black, Indigenous, brown, queer, trans, you know, and lots of interpreters, lots of attendants, lots of snacks. And Patty Byrne, you know, the co-founder of Sins, asking us to pair up and then saying, okay, here's the prompt. Think about one thing that your body or your mind, your disabled body and mind can do that no one else's can. Think about how it makes your experience of pleasure better than somebody who's able-bodied or minded. Mind blown. Like I had never thought that my body was other than a deficit or passing. And I was just like, okay, my brain exploded, you know? There's a lot of other stories I could tell about that, but I wanna say that the TLDR is that disability communities are not perfect and they're not everywhere, but when they exist, when we create them, and one thing that has changed so much in the past decade of disability justice organizing is there are so many more disability justice communities, whether it's 2 or 20 or 200 people in a given geographic location, or it's disabled personals on Instagram, you know, or it's like the whole disability, chronic illness, neurodiversity internet, or deaf, queer, and trans community. There are so many more of us who are creating content and stories and porn and writings and art and politics. And when those spaces keep being created, they are the places where it's the antidote to rape culture, to ableist rape culture. And it's a place where we can start being ourselves without apology and healing, where we can find the possibility models, where we can get dueled into disability and disabled survivorhood by other people who've been there, where we don't always have to explain everything. And when we do explain things, they can be hard sometimes, where we can be in our bodies and our minds as they are unapologetically. And it's definitely a learning curve. Like we're not all always there, but we're, you know, the number one thing I tell people about the joys of disability justice communities is that there's a sense of ease and acceptance. you know, I mean, we're on week 8 of Corona in North America, and, you know, everybody is in sweatpants nation now, but we've been there a lot longer than a lot of people. And, you know, in terms of virtually coming together, I mean, I put on some lipstick for you and because I like it, but there's a real joy and power in that I found in disability spaces where it's okay to be in pain, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be tired, it's okay to be in an altered state, it's okay to have 5 meetings in a row from bed with your breathing tube in. You know, you get to show up as you are. When we have those spaces, we start to be able to imagine relationships and forms of healing and sexual negotiations and everything that's the antithesis of rape culture that is coming from our body, mind's wisdom. That's not us trying to fit into an able-bodied mold. It's okay, I have like 15 more minutes, so I'm gonna start wrapping up. So I got asked to speak a little bit about, you know, that buzzword that's on everyone's lips right now, which is mutual aid and collective care. And I'm going to be controversial. I'm probably one of the people who a lot of people have heard the term collective care because of stuff I wrote. And I kind of feel salty about it now. And let me explain. I am so grateful. I participate in collective care. My whole life is collective care. You know, a friend of mine who I think is maybe listening to this was like, oh yeah, I just do a lot of, what's my organizing? I kind of do a lot of checking in with other sick and disabled Black, Indigenous POC on WhatsApp. And I was like, yep, me too. Somebody in like one of the big, not specifically disabled Seattle mutual aid groups reached out to me and was like, do you want to organize with us? And I was like, first of all, I can't leave the house. Been in here since March the 3rd. Second of all, I'm already doing it. I just like text 20 people a day being like, are you alive? Are you good? Are you in crisis? Do you need to talk? Do you need groceries? Do you need wipes? Do you want to organize, you know, a group, you know, film screening on Netflix? Like, and more than that, but the TLDR is like, I do a lot of collective care. And I have been blessed, and my life has been saved and continues to be saved by other sick and disabled and mad people showing up for me and us showing up for each other. And we have an incredible amount of sophistication and skills in how we do it. And the thing I'm salty about is not that. The thing I'm salty about is that, you know, all of a sudden, like the world's, well, okay, North America has discovered mutual aid, and all of these, you know, maybe more abled people are like doing it. And, you know, a friend of mine was just shaking her head earlier this week. She was like, just to give an example, she's like, my organization, her disabled Southern Brown organization, she's like, we've been leading webinars with full ASL captioning and Spanish translation for 3 years. We know how to do it well. Why didn't any of these groups ask us? And I was like, right. My other friend, another friend of mine said, you know, we're not even getting a finder's fee for this shit. Like nobody's like, hey, disabled people, thanks for figuring this out for us. And I guess like I've seen the point, and I'm getting to it, is that I see some abled folks just being like, oh my God, mutual aid's so great and we don't need the state and mutual aid's gonna save us. And as a sick and disabled person who needs and participates in a lot of collective care, I'm like, okay, I'm like, oh, you're so young and innocent, look at you. And what I wanna say is collective care is miraculous, and it's also hard. It is also, it means it requires trust. It requires a lot of relationship building. It requires having the relationships and the time and the emotional space to feel like you can actually expose your really vulnerable stuff to somebody else. You know, that, you know, it's not people, it's that thing where people will always be like, oh, just ask me if you need anything. And then you're like, yeah, I don't know if I'm actually going to tell you about my ostomy bag. Like that takes some vulnerability, right? You know, collective care is wonderful. It's exhausting. It's triggering. You will get tired. People will be in bad moods. People will be cranky. There are plenty of people out there who need it the worst, who don't really have a lot of community. And that's because of ableism, because, you know, it's really common to be disabled. And even if you're not in an institution, you are not on the top of somebody's popularity list. So you are alone in your apartment because you were just too much for people. Sometimes everybody is in crisis all at the same time. Sometimes people don't say thank you or ask first, you know? And, you know, someone a while ago was like, what do you wish people, you know, it was something I was doing about transformative justice. And the question was, what do you wish you'd known when you started doing this work? And I think I said something like, it was a good day. I was like, wow, I just popped off with this thing that's maybe smart. I was like, I wish that I'd known that I couldn't steward my own trauma by stewarding everyone else's. Yeah, I'm remembering now, it was a mentorship group for people who have done some transformative justice work and are trying to learn to deepen their skills. And I was like, yeah, so before you jump into this work or any kind of care work, and during, you got to really take a look at, what was your role as a kid? Were you the caregiver? Is that how you survived your childhood? Is that where you get your self-esteem from? You know, because that's true for so many of us, right? And it's not bad. It's not bad to care for people, but you really got to check in to be like, am I doing this? Do I know where my stop sign is? Do I know that I'm loved for reasons other than giving care? You know, are there ways that I can figure out, do I even know what my boundaries are? I've been in disabled communities where we were creating wonderful, wonderful spaces. And then when people got abusive, and where I was just like, damn, this is supposed to be the queer and trans PSU disabled community spot. And that person's acting really buck wild. What do we do? I don't want to make us look bad in front of the abled community, right? And all these things, like I just am naming them because I think often there's stuff out there that's like collective care, mutual aid, it's wonderful. And it is. And I also am a firm believer that we do not do ourselves or anyone else a favor by simplifying things or pretending that the complexities aren't there, and that none of this is dirt. You know, it's actually the fabric of the movements we're making. We're all trying out these, as my friend Jairus Dixon calls them, bold, small experiments. And we're doing amazing stuff and then fucking up and then being like, oops, didn't know that was going to happen, and failing and then regrouping and trying again. And sometimes losing people and sometimes losing ourselves and then coming back. So really quickly, like, I'm thinking about, what does it mean to do collective care around abuse, right? Well, first of all, like, I'm just like, oh, well, that's what so many of us, I want to really lift up like the feminized labor of collective care when it comes to survivor work, because like it's what so many of us are already doing. It's that checking in, it's that reaching out to your friend, it's that, you know, noticing that person who looks really drunk at a party and being like, hey, are you okay? Do you need a cab ride? You know, it's all of that stuff. And it often doesn't get lifted up as like capital O organizing, you know, because it happens often outside of nonprofits, you know, institutions. A lot of times it's like people texting and checking in and noticing and writing and observing. And so if it's helpful, I want to lift up that all of that stuff is the meat and bones and flesh of collectively caring for each other and transforming rape culture. All of that checking in is real work. All of that noticing is real work. All of that witnessing, all of that holding space for someone who's having a hard time, including yourself, and not necessarily trying to fix it, but being like, you're not alone and I'm going to be there with you. That's collective care. And everything I just said about like checking in with your boundaries, checking in with like, why am I doing this work? Checking in with, do I know that I can be like, I really want to be there for you right now, but I'm super tired. Is there anyone else you can call? Is the thing. I also, I don't know, I hope I can pull this off. I'm like, it's in my head. I don't know if it'll come out. I'm also thinking about something that I haven't seen talked about a lot outside of the radical mad peoples or psychiatric survivors movements. And that's like the right, but I think that there's for me in my personal life, there's been a big crossover between what I'm about to say and my survivor life. And that is, long story short, kind of our right to determine our lives, even if what our lives look like looks quote unquote crazy or messy. And this is what I'm trying to say. I'm thinking about, you know, a friend of mine, I'm thinking about the right to be nuts in our own house. I'm thinking about our right to be messy, to not have the dishes done, to be crying, to be grieving, to not be okay. And I'm thinking about how a lot of times coercive care, and I would say like in facets of survivor support, the focus has really been around like, well, that's not healthy. And, you want to be able to be functional. And sometimes there's been really intense interventions like, oh, that person's clearly not doing well. They need some help. And I guess like in a nutshell, and I hope this is making sense, I'm just thinking about when I was a young, very feral survivor. And a lot of my healing happened in my crappy apartment that was $450 and a basement. And it was not a great apartment, but I could afford it. And the most healing thing for me was not therapy or a support group. It was being able to have space on my own where I could do whatever I wanted. And that could include being weird. I used to pull the phone out of the wall when I wanted to not talk to someone for 3 days. I was like, I can be as weird looking as I want here. I can be as sad as I am. I can be writing in my journal about my abuse as long as I want to. And no one's going to be looking at me and being like, she looks, oh, I don't know if she's okay. I'm thinking about a line from the white disabled queer poet Laura Hershey, where she said something like, no law, no regulation, no institution can keep me safe if you deny my power. And I think that I'm thinking about a friend of mine who is really struggling with some chronic health stuff, and a family member came to their apartment and was like, oh, they clearly can't take care of themselves. Look how messy it is. And I remember just being like, they have a right to be messy. They have a right to be a sick, sad, brown queer person in their own house who is doing the dishes or not as they can, and the TLDR is like, I think there's a real intersection around the power of autonomy, no matter how it looks. And that as survivors, we often have been told that we look wrong or too much or crazy, and that there's a real power in insisting on our right to be all of those things. And that is an anti-ableist struggle, that there's incredible, incredible connections between the struggle to be like, I want to cry, I want to rage, I want to not be okay, I want to not be over it. And the need for there to be safe places and support for us to do those things, and also choice and autonomy, and all the struggles that mad and disabled people have done to insist on our right to live in our own disabled and mad ways in community, or to have the right to be us when we are in institutions, if that's the only choice there is. I wanted to close by, I'm almost done. There's a quote that I found, I shared it yesterday in the writing workshop that I did. And it's by Audre Lorde, and it's in the Cancer Journals. And, many folks in disability justice, led by Black disabled queer folks, have done so much to reclaim Audre Lorde as a disability justice ancestor. Something that I think that a lot of us have been talking about for a while now is that, when you look at some of the real heroes of second wave 70s and 80s, Black, Indigenous, and POC feminism, whether it's Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Gloria Anzaldúa, Audre, these are all people who are disabled, and their disability is a big part of their radicalism, whether or not they use the D word, right? There's a lot I could say about the oppression that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera both face as people who had physical and or mental health disabilities, and how some of the organizing they did, came out of that place of being neurodiverse, Black and brown, trans women, sex workers. It takes a really beautifully rich disabled vision that's like, I'm going to do stuff differently, to start something like Star House, Street Transvestite Activist Revolutionary House, which was the apartment they both created for street-based trans women of color who are sex working to have a safe place to go. They were like, we're not going to wait for the homeless shelter to open its doors. We're going to do our own thing. So I think that it's interesting because Audre was really clear about not only being someone who lived with cancer for the last big chunk of her life, but growing up visually impaired and legally blind. So I'm just going to read this quote. It's from page 40 of the Cancer Journals, where Audre says, "Growing up fat, Black, female, and almost blind in America requires so much surviving that you have to learn from it or die. I carry tattooed upon my heart a list of names of women who did not survive, and there's always room for one more, my own. That is to remind me that survival is only part of the task. The only other part is teaching. I have been in training for a long time. So I was thinking about power, and I was thinking about hope, and I was thinking about like all of those disabled survivor superpowers I was mentioning. And I love Audrey as every single thing she wrote. You know, she was such a prophet, and her words stay with me. I think what really stays with me, there's a lot of things, but the thing I want to lift up is what she said at the end, that survival's only part of the task, the other part is teaching. And to me, that just really speaks to what she's saying about being fat, Black, female, and disabled in America, and a survivor of abuse, and surviving, and then being like, okay, what am I going to pass on from everything I've learned from that brilliant survivorhood? You know, what are all the things I'm really, really brilliant at from surviving? And I think about, you know, stuff that I remember reading in Zami, where she's writing about like both the really hard stuff about being 18 and surviving an illegal abortion, and all of the brilliant ways that she kept herself alive, you know, and reached out for support. In my own life right now, when I think about this moment that we're in as disabled survivors, so right now I'm living by myself because my roommates had to move out pretty unexpectedly because one of them is a medical worker working with patients who have COVID-19, and they're not being, my roommate's was not being given adequate PPE all the time. And I was kind of like, well, you don't have enough PPE and I don't have enough of an immune system, so this is not going to work to share an apartment. And it's been really heartbreaking to lose that, to not be able to live together, because for the past couple of years, we shared so much access, intimacy, and support as chronically ill and neurodiverse friends living in a house together. And so I was having a pretty bad sciatica and just like pain flare, like the kind where you want to throw up from the pain. And I was trying to take a bath, and then I was like, oh shit, I can't get up. And then I was like, what happens? I was having a moment where I was like, what happens if I slip and fall and nobody's in this apartment? And then I flashed back to being 22 and also living alone, borrowing a bathtub, and having the exact same circumstance, except that I had so much less disability consciousness and community. And I just thought to myself, I figured how to get myself out of the tub and uninjured then, and I can do it now. And I can do it even more so now because I've built up 20 years of community and skill and the ability to ask for help. And it made me think a lot about how, as disabled people, we're often time travelers. Like Ellen Samuels has that piece, 6 Ways of Looking at Crip Time, where she's like, I mean, she's writing about things like being in her 30s and in the like the aqua aerobics, you know, therapy pool with a lot of elders. And she's like, yeah, I'm like a young old person. And I think about how a lot of the time I feel like when I was younger, my older self was sending me messages I needed to stay alive. And sometimes now I feel like my younger self, or even myself 2 years ago, has stuff that's in my bones that's kept me alive that I can draw on now. We have been reaching to each other for a long time. If I knew how to reach for other people when there was so much less organized community 22 years ago to save myself from abusive relationships and steward my survivorship, I can do it now. I want to name that I've talked a lot about disability community, and I also want to really name that disabled people are always resisting, including when we are completely isolated from other people. When we're institutions, there are a hell of a lot of disabled young people in lockup who fight back all the time. And I really believe in the principle that the solutions that are created in situations where we have the least resources are some of the most powerful ones, because they always work. And I would say that as disabled survivors, we have a hell of a lot of those. So I am looking forward to us continuing to crip survivorhood, to remake our ideas of what healing and getting old well as survivors can look like, and to reach out, to be able to keep reaching out to each other for love, for acceptance, for healing, for just being with each other. And I really invite everyone who does not have the good luck to be disabled to learn from us and listen to us and witness us and support us in our work. Thank you so much for having me. That's it.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Leah. I hope everyone's like clapping. I know I'm like so overwhelmed by everything that you just shared. just going to take a moment to let all of that land, and we'll process later. We're going to take a quick break to let everyone tend to themselves however they need to. We'll be back here really, really soon, so don't go too far, and we'll be back with questions and answers with Leah.
Cool. About how long?
Probably 2 minutes.
I'm gonna pee really quick. I'll be right back.
2 minutes. All right, hopefully everyone has had a moment to take care of themselves, take a little bit of a pause, break, breathe. We're going to go ahead and get started with our question and answer portion of tonight with our incredible keynote speaker. Leah, thank you so much for joining us again. It's been such a pleasure to have you and glean all of this wisdom that you've I know gave in your writing workshop yesterday. There are lots of folks who connected with us and said that they really loved it and benefited from it. So thank you for that as well. And in your keynote address, I took several notes. So, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a few questions for you. that we love you to just share your thoughts about. And then we've also got a few questions from the audience that hopefully we'll have a time for a few. There aren't a whole lot, so hopefully we can get those questions answered. So our first question for you is, how would you complicate the narratives of survival? I think, yeah, just the narratives of survival that I think are normally what we may
Yeah.
see, hear, feel.
Yep, for sure. Can everybody hear me okay? We can hear. Yeah. So many. I mean, I think here's the thing. I don't think that we have a ton of narratives around of survivorhood yet. Like, I mean, I think that we have stories of the bad things that happen, and what I'm interested in is like really what I've always been hungry for is different, you know, stories, pathways about like what it's like to get older as a survivor, what it's like to continue to be a survivor. And pretty much like, I think a lot of what we have is either this idea of like somehow you get totally fixed and your survivorhood's gone and you don't think about it anymore and you're just quote unquote normal, or you know, there's this idea of being broken, right? Like, or losing your innocence, which is something I used to hear from young people I worked with a lot. And I know on a personal level, a lot of, you know, my friends who are survivors, myself, like, I feel like this is getting better for me, but I know for years I really was like, okay, I'm doing good. I don't think about it anymore. And then, you know, I'd have a trauma moment or a memory or a trigger and I'd be like, and I would just be like, that would be hard in and of itself. But I would also feel this tremendous sense of failure and fear. Like, I'm so screwed up. When does it go away? And right. And so I think like there's a piece I wrote that's in care work called Not Over It, Not Fixed and Living a Life Worth Living. That was my little attempt to be like, you know, like healing can happen and change can happen, but the idea that just like your survivorhood's like a cut that you stitch up and you're good as new, that's not really in the cards for a lot of people.
Right.
And I just want more people to write those stories of like, this is what it's actually like to be me at 40, at 50, at 60. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why people don't, but one of them is that, you know, it's so personal. And I know there's stuff that I would love to write about, but it involves other people in my life. It involves my partner. And I'm just like, I really respect our privacy. But I
Right.
know so many people are out there like, do it. Tell me what this looks like. That kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there any experiences, and you kind of pointed to age, but are there any experiences in particular about survivorhood that you do wish you heard more of? We talked a lot about like disabled sex, right? Like like those kinds of narratives.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things come to mind. Like one of them is like, what it's like if your parents or your family members or your perpetrators, what it's like to get older. I want more stories around estrangement, you know, and I also want more stories about what it's like when you're not going to get accountability from the people who hurt you and they're dying.
Yes.
I'm in that right now. I'm lucky. I mean, I wouldn't say lucky, but I feel blessed because I have some friends we can talk about it. But, you know, there's not a lot out there. And one thing that I was kind of just talking a little bit about with a friend was I was like, man, you know, something we're not hearing anybody talk about during Corona is I'm like, I know there's a lot of people out there who are like, shoot, my abusive whoever, you know, who's 65, 70, whatever, is maybe going to die during this thing. And what is that? What do I do with that? You know, like, I think that's one thing. I think another thing is not just what it's like when you get older and you're not over it, but also I think it's the thing about getting older. I mean, and by getting older, I even mean like, you know, you were 18 and now you're 25 and being like, oh shoot, I remembered other stuff, or I figured out different parts of my survivorhood that I didn't know was in there. You know, because I think a lot of times people, there's this idea that like, oh, one thing happened to you and then you dealt with it and then it's done. And then it's like, even if that is true, and, you know, for so many of us, we've survived multiple things, but even if it was just, you know, one incident, one relationship, you know, I've been talking with other friends of mine who are in their 40s where they were like, whoa, I just figured out this new thing that I didn't know was in there. And for that to be seen as both like something that can be hard, but also something that's like, whoa, I am gaining more knowledge of myself. And I'm able to like know what, what my, what I, what's this, I don't want to say baggage, but what's this stuff that I'm carrying around?
Right.
Right. I want to be seen as like, I mean, not that it's always fun, but that it's like, oh, that's actually cool that you're like figuring out more of what's going on for you, because then you can steward it better, you can hold it better. So yeah, those are some things.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for sharing. I know you kind of spoke a little bit to this already, but what are examples of community care, right? And you talked about the tension that you're holding with that, but community care and access, mutual aid that you turn to for hope or inspiration.
Oh my God, so much, so much. And this is the thing is like, I talked about it a little bit, but I just want to say there's so many ways that we can do this, and they're usually not particularly glamorous or like visible, but they're happening all the time. Just in the last couple of weeks, I can think of everything from, supporting a friend of mine who is an elder, who's disabled and fat and genderqueer and brown, who was like, my care provider showed up at work and at my house and then found out she was sick 2 days later. And I'm really worried I had an exposure. And we were like, okay, what do you want? And they were like, I want you to help me set up something on the Google Docs where someone will call me twice a day and just make sure I'm not collapsing my apartment. And if you don't hear from me, this is what I want you to do. And there was that part, but there was also just like, hey, I'm gonna just let you talk. You want me to just listen right now? That's really freaky. Just to showing up for each other that way. So that's like a real, small scale thing that's not so small scale. And then on the other hand, I'm thinking I'm a late arrival, but like I'm helping out with this thing called Crip Fund that a bunch of friends of mine who are mostly like East Coast disabled folks started. And it's one of those like Corona fundraisers, but they were like, let's just get some money together because people are saying, oh, Corona doesn't discriminate, but we actually know it's going to hit like, right, like a lot of people more than others. And we were able to raise over $50,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Thank you. And then there's all the things about like, then GoFundMe made us was like, hold on a second, and didn't give us the money for almost a month. And we also were like, okay, we stopped taking requests when 120 people hit us up because we're like, we want to give everyone $500. And we just, and all of those things. But it was kind of one of those like, nobody can do everything, but everyone can do something things where I'm like, if we can send money to disabled BIPOC who are in really dire situations and it'll be like, here's $500, no strings attached, it's not from Trump, that's really inspiring, right?
Yeah, emphasis on the no strings attached, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't have to fill out any paperwork. So I guess those would be like, there's a lot more I could say, but I guess those are two examples of just some of the power we have. And then there's all the little guys around, friends of mine just being like, hey, I know you can't go to the grocery store. I'm at Trader Joe's. What do you want? You want some flowers? And I'm like, yes, I want those $3.99.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, those $3 flowers are important. So the next question is for folks that are looking for tangible next steps to address ableism and sexual violence, what suggestions do you have?
Well, first of all, I would say just assume that there's disability in every bit of the work that you're doing. Like, don't be surprised by it. Don't be like, oh, right, that other form of oppression. Like, really, like, just assume that whether or not people are telling you, if you're doing any kind of survivor work, there's disabled people in the room, that you're working with people who are disabled in all the ways that disability happens. Don't wait for disabled people to call you out to make your work accessible. If you don't know how to do it, right? Like reach out to different deaf, disabled community groups. Look up, there's a lot of really good access suggestions and audits out there online. Sins Invalid have some really good stuff on their blog about here's access suggestions for a community event, for a mobilization. My friend Carolyn Lazard has a really great, I mean, it's aimed towards arts, but it's like really goes into detail about here's CART, here's ASL, here's how you afford it, here's how you have to make it happen. Here's like, low stimulation stuff, like all of these things. I think a lot of people, when they're new to thinking about like bringing in access to their work and, looking at ableism, there's a real like, oh shit, this is gonna limit, they see it as like, this is gonna limit the work we do somehow. And I'm like, no, it's actually gonna make it more accessible for everybody, right?
Absolutely.
It's like Alice Wong with, like the Disability Visibility Project. She was like, okay, everybody who's hitting the, like the button to open the door so you don't have to touch the door during Corona, thank the Americans with Disability Act. We didn't have those for disabled organizing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So all that stuff, I would say, in terms of survivor stuff specifically, do some unpacking around the ways in which ideas of normal, broken, fixed, cured get into ideas of what healing looks like for survivors, right? And really also be aware that for a lot of us who are survivors, so much of our abuse comes from people who are giving us care, whether it's, parents, paid care stuff, but also often, like this is something that Peggy Munson has written about. She had a piece in The Revolution Starts at Home where she talks about this, where she's like, she writes about being a disabled white femme, and she's like, look, I've stayed with abusive partners because they were the only people in my community who actually were able to do the non-glamorous kinds of care I needed.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to help somebody out in an abusive situation, you can't separate our needs for care and intimacy from that. And you need to really be ready to be like, okay, do I know how to hook you up with a personal care attendant or an accessible apartment or just somebody who's not going to shame you, right? Like, am I able to be? So those are just, and really, there's so many good, one ironic thing about Corona is like so many of us who are disabled are being asked to do trainings online because people are like, oh, we need to learn.
What do we do? Yeah.
Right. So like there actually was just a really great webinar that I was watching right before I got on this by Dustin Gibson, Saray Jarrell Johnson, Talila Lewis, Normala Erebus, Saray Jarrell Johnson, Saray, a bunch of people, mostly Black disabled folks, really talking about like disability justice and organizing. And just things like, hi, so, the meds that are used for lupus that are being denied people, and being like that Trump is like, oh, this is going to fix it. They're like, that's a disability justice issue. And you know what? A lot of Black people have lupus. A lot of Black people have sickle cell. We're losing our drugs. That's an intersection, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think just like really like look for places like that where you can be like, okay, how do I start looking at where I can bring disability justice organizing into the work I'm already doing? Sorry, I'm speeding up, but yes.
No worries. Thank you for being thorough. We appreciate it. Can you share some thoughts or examples of the ways you see transformative justice and disability justice connecting or informing each other?
Oh yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, I like this question.
Well, there's a lot. Okay, I'll try and be brief. So first of all, I think most people I know who are trying to do some kind of transformative justice work are survivors. And as survivors, most of us have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, if not other disabilities. And I think one thing I really want us to address is that doing TJ work the way a lot of us have done it is really re-traumatizing because it's about being that person who gets the midnight phone calls and has to intervene in the really hairy situations. And hence, I think that's actually a big reason why we see a lot of people who've been doing TJ work for years, they hit a point where they're like, bye, I'm gonna go do something else. And second, I think for years, and I understand why we've been doing this, a lot of people who are trying to advance transformative justice we've really been pushing this line that everybody has to be involved. Everybody has to learn how to do this. We all can replace the cops if we all do it. And then some people are like I have friends who are like, why don't people just step up? And I'm like, because they know this is going to be traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look like fun, it looks scary. So I think one place it intersects is like, I think that we need to actually start, and some of us are doing it, start looking at how we can make transformative justice work. How we can actually be like, okay, maybe some of this will be hard, but what are ways that we can actually build in to take care of ourselves as TJ workers so that we can have boundaries, have breaks, not when someone is like, holy shit, I'm really triggered right now.
Or be able to acknowledge when you're not okay going into some of those TJ circles, right?
Exactly. Take our time with it, do really pace it in a different way. I think those are some things. I think I really want to look at how we can bring more healing and more breaks and more, I mean, I would say like disabled census of time, which like, I don't just mean slow. You know, my friend Najera Stickson, she's like, you know, sometimes it's accessible to do things real quick, to be like, I got 30 minutes, let's go. And that's the amount of energy I had for it, right? I think all those things are things. I think other things around disability and TJ are, I mean, I just think like this is something myself and Elliot Fukui, who's a trans Asian disabled person, survivor of a lot of youth psychiatrization, we just did a talk where we were talking about how, you know, a lot of people who are who are organizing against police violence have kind of raised this idea of like, oh, you know, so much of the time when police are called into a situation, you know, what the person they were called in for, that 911 got called on, really needed was mental health support. So what we need is like more mental health institutions. And that's one place where, right, you know, disability justice would be like, no, because that shit is also a prison. There may not be guns, but there will be other things like forcible drugging, like electroshock, like, you know, really bad situations. So I think that's one place where I would say disability justice would say, yeah, no, it's really, obviously it's really, really bad that when people call 911 on a wellness check, you know, like the cops come in with their guns drawn. And we know that 50% of police murders of Black, Indigenous, POC, in at least 50% of those cases, those people were also disabled, right? There's so many incidences of that. But what we're saying is we're like, the solution is not a different kind of institution. It's about things that are not coercive, like, you know, like peer respite homes where it's not coerced, you can just go.
Absolutely.
And have a place when you're in crisis. And it's also not about like, oh, if we just give the cops a training about disability, they won't shoot people, because that's not gonna work. Those are some things I also like, you know, I feel so hard. I want there to be more accessible forms of accountability when people who are disabled cause harm. Because right now we're in this place where, you know, there is so much stigma, and every time there's a mass shooting, it's like all the ableism comes out, like that person was crazy, why weren't they locked up? And then as neurodiverse people, we're always like, we're mostly not serious.
Having to defend yourself,
yourself and be like, no, those are racist white guys, you know. And then also there are some ways in which sometimes, like, I'll speak for myself, like my neurodiversity has sometimes put me in a position where I'm like, shit, I just did something I didn't want to do. And the solution is not just stop being that way, where I'm like, well, I don't know if I can just snap my fingers and not have fill in the blank, whatever. But I don't want a free pass. You know, I want something in the middle that's an accessible way that I can repair the harm. And, you know, I think it's really, really hard to talk about because the stigma is so real. But, you know, so many people have that story of like, yeah, my mom, you know, had emotional hard times. I mean, I'll speak for myself. My mom had emotional hard times, was a survivor, did not have support, and was abusive, not because she was disabled, but I think because her disability and trauma did not have the support that they needed, right? And I think that that is an intersection with how, you know, when it comes to childhood abuse, you know, something that Generation 5 and the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective and a lot of other people have written about is that there's hardly, especially in the United States, there's hardly any place where if someone's like, I think I'm about to hit my kid or hurt my kid, where they can be like, I need help, right? Like it's either prison or it's don't talk about it. And there are actually all these examples of in Europe, but still, where they had like warm lines for people who are like, I'm struggling with some urges, where they could get support, witness, and accountability, and the abuse stats dropped, right?
Wow.
Right, yeah.
That's amazing.
Right, you know, there's a really good documentary, Hollow Water, that's, it's Canadian, and it's off of the Hollow Water Reservation in Northern Ontario, where there's a whole Indigenous community that started, that they were like, yeah, we started doing healing from residential schools, and then we realized there was a lot of abuse, but everyone who was abusing their kids was also a survivor of abuse, and we didn't want to send the whole community to jail. So we held these really intense circle processes that sometimes took years, but we were like, we weren't going to send our people to jail, and we also weren't going to let the kids get hurt. And I don't know, I mean, there's a connection there for me around the patience and the time and the commitment, and also the real talk that went into being like, we see what's happening and we have compassion for the roots of it, and we're also going to say it stops here,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, yeah, I think the takeaway that I got from that was you said we want an accessible way to repair the harm, right? Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, that's what,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
That's what's wanted. We're gonna take a few questions from the audience,
Cool.
really quick because I know that we have just a few minutes until we're done, unfortunately.
Okay.
So someone says, "Thank you for your talk. I am in a BIPOC queer relationship, and we both have disabilities. Sometimes it feels like there is only room for one of us to be chronically ill and disabled.
Yeah.
Any recommendations on how to make space for both of us, hold boundaries that honor both of our needs?"
Oh, yes. I love this is the $3 million question. I love this question. Thank you for asking it. So I'm just going to preface what I'm saying by being like, I realize sometimes it's just you and the other person and you don't have other community at all. But I will say that something that I have been, working towards lately that actually was like, how come I didn't think of this till recently is, I had a friend who was just like, your partner doesn't have to be the only person who does your care stuff. Like, and they were sharing how with their disability, they were like, yeah, my partner's not actually on my care circle. I didn't want her to be. I have these 4 friends. And when I have something come up, if I have a flare or a hard time, I go to my friends, not her.
Right.
If I do go to her, we really negotiate it, but she's not my first stop. And I was like, oh shit, that's so deep, because I'm like, right. And I was like, oh, this really got into my head. It's amazing how it gets into your head that, like, of course your partner is going to be the person that, like, is your first go-to for anything, right? So I guess that just opened up for me. I was like, I think I just had really internalized, because often my partner is somebody who I prioritize in a lot of ways, I'm like, oh, there are those expectations that had crept in for me around, like, you've got to be the one who holds it, listens to it, and also vice versa. If you're going through something, I've got to be there. Like, I'm not allowed to say no. And it's just kind of automatic that you go towards me, right? And it was really interesting for me to consider changing my relationship, where I'm like, maybe for certain parts of my disability, I'm just like, which was cool, because I was in situations where I was like, I don't actually want you to help right now. I want you to go away, because this just doesn't feel good. And like, I think this triggers you, and I just need to be alone right now anyway. Anyway, long story short, I think it's interesting to think about, are there ways that you can do, an advanced plan where you're like, when certain things come up, when you have a flare up or a hard time, or when you have certain needs come up, are there other people that you could either pre-plan that I'll reach out to those folks, or if you're like, nobody's coming to mind, can you do a little mapping, being like, before it hits, around like, who are other people who can be there for me if that aren't my partner? Because I know that, so often it's true that when we're actually in real time having the flare or the hard time, it's really hard to remember who are those people, who are those things I came up with. I mean, I've started writing down like a hard times map and being like, here's these people who I could reach out to for this.
I love that hard times map. Like,
Yeah.
it's like pod mapping, but like for hard times. Yeah.
Exactly. And like Icarus Project, which is now being called, they changed their name to Fire Week Collective soon. They've used the term mad mapping for a lot of time for mental health. Some other people call it a RAP plan. There's like lots of different ways that we can think of it. I don't know, like, I think it can be really hard when you're both sick and disabled BIPOC and you have that closeness to, in the moment, be like, just be like, whoa, I love you, and ooh, you're going through it, so am I, and to know that to know how to practice being like, hey, I love you and I can't do that right now. Or to be like, I love you and you're going through what you're going through and I'm still going through what I'm going through, and they're both here. I think a lot about like doing that stuff that relationship counselors tell you to do, which is like, go have a cup of coffee when you're not in the moment and discuss how you're going to do it. And not that any of us can go for a cup of coffee right now, but something like that, doing that kind of like conversation beforehand around like, so what are the possibilities, and then experimenting with it. I think that we have a lot often when we're in disabled relationships where the paradigm that comes up is like, we've got to show up for each other, like it's loyalty, and I think it takes some kind of swimming against the tide to be like, I'm still loyal to you and I still love you. And it doesn't mean that like there's only room for one of us to be disabled or have needs at a time. There's got to be both. I think being creative, like, which can be about reaching out to other people And also sometimes, you know, you talk to the person and they're like, I just want to play my video game. You know, you don't have to do anything. And it's like, great, I'll be over here doing my thing. I don't know if that's helpful, but just, yeah, that creativity and that like looking to expand the circle so that like you get support for both your disabilities, but maybe not from each other all the time as the first person.
Yes, thank you so much for answering that. Someone says, such an honor to hear you speak tonight. What are your favorite books or texts on ableism and disability justice? Written accessibly.
Written accessibly. Oh, cool, Ebony, thank you. I really, really love Sins and Valids, Skin, Tooth, and Bone. The basis of our movement is our people. If you just Google Skin, Tooth, and Bone, it comes up. They have an expanded version and you can get it online or they will send you a booklet, and it has lots of really accessible writing about what is disability justice and like lots of different facets of it. That's like a primer I recommend a lot. I also, honestly, a lot of stuff is online, you know, like there's writers I love, like I love Aurora Levins Morales. Her book Kindling is all about her being Puerto Rican and Jewish and elder and queer and chronically ill, and the connections between pesticide use in Puerto Rico and her chronic illness and abuse and all of these things.
Yes.
She's a wonderful.
Environmental justice, transformative justice, disability justice, all the intersections.
Exactly. She's great. Saray Jarrell Johnson is a poet whose new book Slingshot I really love. I really always love, if you look up the Disability Visibility Project, Alice Wong's website and podcast, she publishes so many essays and has interviews with people, and they're all transcribed. And she has a book coming out called, that I think is called Disability Visibility, Stories by Disabled People, and that has a lot of great essays. Yeah, those are some places to start. And she doesn't have a book out yet, but my work wife, Stacey Milburn, if you follow her on Facebook, her fucking notes about the work that she does with the Disability Justice Culture Club, you know, which is an East Oakland disabled BIPOC organizing project, are just so smart and amazing and full of heart. Yeah, those are some.
Wow, great. I think you gave us like 5.
Yeah.
So hopefully everyone heard those. Again, we want to remind you that this will be recorded and posted later, so that folks will have access to all of this great information that Leah is giving us. Our last question that we have time for is, does anyone know if there's a dating app for all of the awesome, disabled, mad, chronically ill survivors to meet each other?
I don't know about an app. I do know that on Instagram, I've seen disabled personals and autistic personals. They're 2 different Instagram sites. And they're pretty, especially disabled personals. I think it's slowed down a little recently, but it really moved me seeing all of these different disabled folks from all over the world, mostly queers, being like, and like who are looking for dating, but also like for friendship, for like asexual connections, like all kinds of stuff. Yeah, that's really great. Toronto has these really great online disabled sex parties that are happening recently. I haven't been, but if you follow Cyrus Marcus Ware on Facebook, he posts them a lot. So keep an eye out for that if you are interested at all.
In Toronto.
But it's on the internet, so it's everywhere. Right.
Oh, okay. Right. It's everywhere. Okay. When you said like disabilities everywhere, so is the disabled sex party.
Exactly.
Thank you, Leah, so much for answering these questions, for just imparting so much wisdom and knowledge on us tonight. Like I said, thank you again for that workshop yesterday. We are just truly grateful for you. And yeah, look forward to, staying connected and having you back again.
Yay! I would love that. Thank you everybody for being here for this, and thank you so much Alicia and Corey and Mona and everybody for supporting this. Julene, everybody else who I can't see on the thing. This has been, Jenny, this has been really amazing, and I hope everybody liked it.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're awesome, amazing. And hopefully you all know what else is amazing. We have a giveaway. We've been advertising it. All of the folks who registered with us today were eligible to win this nice prize. We've got a basket. Um, we got a basket from, let's see, Box Tag, who even through COVID donated these gifts to us for our participants tonight. In that basket is contained some blue and white sage, a selenite crystal, rosemary lutea, palo santo, charcoal, and loose leaf incense, candles, and a whole bunch more. Also, a $25 gift certificate to Scotty's Pizza Parlor. And so we randomly selected one of the participants, and we have a winner. Drum roll. It looks like we have, winner is, oh wait, Sitara Pendiala, I believe it is, spelled Sitarapendyala. Congratulations, Sitara. Please be in touch with us. You can get in touch with the Women's Resource Center at wrc@pdx.edu so that we can send you your gift. Thank you for registering. Hopefully you were able to join us this evening. Before we leave, we'd like to remind everyone about a workshop tomorrow, Disability and Intimacy, talking about power differences. That'll be happening tomorrow at noon. We'd also like to remind you about Denim Day. Denim Day is next week on Wednesday, April 29th. Denim Day is an international day of protest against victim blaming. So wear your denim on Wednesday as you're having your Zoom meetings, chilling at home, not doing anything in your sweatpants. We also want to let you know that all of our recorded workshops for SAAM 2020 will be made available on our website soon. So please check back to access those recordings. Please give us some time because there'll be some editing and fine tuning that we'll have to do. But again, check back with us. And last but not least, we want you to know that advocacy is available to currently enrolled students of all genders at PSU experiencing sexual or relationship violence and stalking through the Women's Resource Center. This is a free and confidential service offered as a right under Title IX, and you can find out how to schedule an appointment and get connected to other resources by going to our website at pdx.edu/WRC. Below is how you can schedule an appointment through our online booking system. You can also just call us at the number listed below. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We had a blast. We will see you again next year.